Montana cattlemen thought their empire was untouchable until 1989, when media mogul Ted Turner crashed their world with a $21 million cash deal, seizing the legendary Flying D Ranch and vowing to wipe away every trace of a century-old cattle dynasty. In place of barbed wire and livestock, Turner unleashed a radical vision: restore 113,000 acres to wild prairie, unleash thousands of bison, and build an empire where business and nature collide. But this wasn't just conservation, this was war, and the old guard had never seen a threat like the one revealed inside Flying D Ranch. What could drive a man to tear down tradition and risk everything for a herd of ghosts? And what happened when the wolves came back? Ted Turner did not slip quietly into Montana, he landed like a thunderclap. The state's biggest real estate brokers got the call in spring 1989. A mysterious buyer wanted the legendary Flying D Ranch, cash, no contingencies, no drawn-out negotiations. Word spread fast. This was not some Texas oil man or a Wall Street investor. This was Turner, the brash cable king whose face was as familiar as his voice. CNN, the Braves, America's Cup. He rolled into Bozeman with a checkbook that could swallow counties whole and a reputation for doing things his way. The brokers, Joel Ledbetter and Jim Taylor of Hall & Hall, had been told the Flying D was not for sale. Turner did not care. He ordered a private tour, took one look at the 113,000-acre sweep of grass, river, and timber, and decided on the spot. He wanted it all. No haggling, no slow dance. The price? $21 million in cash at roughly $200 an acre. The Sheltons, old Texas ranching money, had set the figure high to ward off tire kickers. Turner wired the money like he was buying a yacht, not a kingdom. The deal closed before most locals even knew the ranch was on the market. Turner's presence was impossible to ignore. He strode into meetings in his signature boots and denim, talking big, laughing loud, and making it clear he was not here to blend in. He did not just buy the land, he bought the cattle, the equipment, the whole operation. But he was not interested in running it the old way. He told the brokers and ranch managers to clear out the Angus, sell the tractors, and start thinking about what this place looked like before barbed wire ever cut the prairie. The Flying D would be his canvas, and he was about to paint over a century of Montana tradition. The local cattlemen watched with a mix of suspicion and outrage. Turner was a media tycoon, not a rancher. He talked about bison and wildness, not beef prices or feedlots. The handshake deals and neighborly codes that had ruled the valley for generations meant nothing to a billionaire who closed in cash and played by his own rules. The old guard wondered what would be left of their world once Turner's vision took hold. For now, the only certainty was that the Flying D and Montana ranching itself would never be the same. Coffee shops in Gallatin Gateway buzzed with speculation the morning after news broke. Some said Turner was just another city slicker with too much money and not enough sense. Others muttered that he would turn the valley into a playground for celebrities and environmentalists. By noon, the Flying D was the only topic at the feed store. Old-timers compared the ranch to Texas' King Ranch, but said at least the King Ranch ran cattle. Here, a billionaire had bought a kingdom and was talking about erasing everything that made it work. Cattlemen from both Gallatin and Madison counties gathered at the stock growers' meeting, jaws set, eyes narrowed. The president of the local association called Turner's plans a slap in the face to every working rancher. Rumors spread that he planned to let bison roam free, with no fences to keep them off neighboring land. Folks worried about disease, about bison busting through fences, about wolves following the herds. One rancher told the Bozeman Daily Chronicle, "If he doesn't want to run cows, fine. But you can't just toss out 100 years of hard work and expect the rest of us to cheer." Over at the Blue Moon Cafe, the talk turned sharp. Some feared property values would skyrocket, pushing out families who had worked this land for generations. Others wondered if Turner would block access to public fishing spots along the Madison. Every story grew in the retelling. Turner was bringing in movie stars, banning hunting, maybe even paving the road to Spanish Creek. A few saw opportunity. Maybe he would hire more hands or pay better than the Sheltons ever did. Most just felt uneasy, like the ground was shifting under their boots. The backlash wasn't just about money, it was about pride, tradition, and the fear that a stranger with deep pockets could rewrite the rules of the West. Turner's vision threatened to upend the unwritten codes that bound neighbor to neighbor. For the ranchers watching from across the fence line, the Flying D was more than land. It was a way of life, and now nothing felt safe. Ted Turner stood on the porch of the Spanish Creek house, a battered book of Carl Bodmer watercolors open in his lap. The morning air carried the smell of cut hay and diesel, sounds of tractors and cattle drifting up from the valley below. Ranch manager Bud Griffith and Russ Miller from Hall, and Hall watched as Turner looked from the pages to the horizon and back, silent for a moment, sizing up the clash between past and present. Bodmer's paintings showed wild prairies, bison crashing through sage, no fences, no wires, just open country. Turner tapped a finger on a print of Montana's northern plains. That's what I want the Flying D to look like. He didn't want a modern ranch. He wanted a time machine. The Angus cattle, the hayfields, the power lines. Turner called them out, one by one. Gone, gone, gone. That's your job, boys. Bud stared at the landscape, then at the book, then back to Turner. What do you know about Bison? Turner grinned. Not much, but we're going to find out. The idea was as radical as it sounded. This wasn't tweaking a grazing plan. This was erasing a century of ranching and trying to bring back the prairie as it was before the first white surveyor hammered in a fence post. Turner wanted the land wild again, shaped by animals that belonged here long before the first cattle drive. No more rotating herds by the calendar, no more patchwork of barbed wire and irrigated fields. If the paintings showed bison, that's what the land would hold. If the paintings showed open space, the fences would come down. Griffith later recalled the moment as the day the rules changed. He'd spent his life running cattle, measuring success by pounds shipped and hay cut. Now, the measure would be how closely the land matched a watercolor from 150 years ago. Turner's vision wasn't nostalgia, it was an order. Restore the land, run bison, make the Flying D look like it did before anyone called it a ranch. For the men on the porch, it was the start of a job no one in Montana had ever tried. Work crews arrived before dawn, trucks loaded with bolt cutters, post pullers, and miles of heavy gloves. Their task was clear: erase a century of ranching, one strand of barbed wire at a time. Over the next year, they tore out nearly 500 miles of interior fencing, more than the distance from Bozeman to Denver. Every mile meant hundreds of steel posts yanked from rocky ground, wire coiled and hauled away, gates and braces stacked for auction or scrap. Some days, the crews worked through snow squalls or under a harsh summer sun, boots sinking in mud where irrigation ditches once ran. No corner of the ranch escaped their reach. The old hayfields were next. Thousands of acres of irrigated ground, once green under the steady spray of pivots, went dry. Crews dismantled pipes and pumps, loaded rusted wheel lines onto flatbeds, and stripped out the last traces of artificial waterworks. Diesel tractors and hay bale stackers, machines that had run non-stop each July, were lined up for auction, their engines silenced for good. The barnyards emptied out, corrals pulled apart, the familiar hum of ranch life replaced by the steady grind of laborers undoing what generations had built. Power lines came down too. Where wires had cut across the big valley, crews toppled poles and rolled up cable, leaving only open sky between the river and the timberline. Every structure that did not fit Turner's vision, feed bunks, windbreaks, even the odd cattle chute, was torn out and hauled away. Only the dirt roads remained, winding through a landscape stripped bare of its recent past. The cost was staggering, both in dollars and sweat. But for the men on the ground, many of them local hands who had once strung those same fences, the work held a strange kind of pride. They were not just breaking down a ranch, they were clearing the way for something wilder, something that had not walked this ground in 100 years. By the end, the Flying D stood wide open, ready for the thunder of bison hooves and the return of a prairie that did not answer to fence lines or hayfields. The first bison trucks rolled through the Flying D gates in the spring of the early 1990s. They came from all over, South Dakota, Nebraska, even Canada, each load packed with animals bred for hardiness and the wild instincts Turner wanted back on this land. Ranch hands and veterinarians worked side by side, unloading the new arrivals with a mix of caution and awe. Bison do not move like cattle. They hit the ground running, heads high, eyes wide, muscles bunched for a fight or a sprint. It took patience and a steady hand to guide them through makeshift corrals and into their new home. The logistics were staggering. Every animal had to be checked, tagged, and cleared for disease before joining the growing herd. Some brought bloodlines traced to the last wild survivors of the plains. Others came from private preserves, each animal a genetic investment in the future of the American bison. Crews worked long days, sometimes through snow flurries or spring mud, to keep the operation moving. By the end of that first year, hundreds of bison dotted the old cattle pastures. Within a few seasons, the numbers climbed into the thousands. The ranch staff, used to the rhythms of cattle drives and branding pens, found themselves learning bison behavior from scratch. Four-wheelers replaced horses. New handling systems had to be built. Higher fences, sturdier gates, chutes designed for animals that could jump 6 feet from a standstill. Every day brought fresh lessons in patience and improvisation. The Flying D was no longer just a ranch, it was becoming a living experiment in restoration. Each truckload delivered more than livestock. It delivered the raw material for Turner's vision. A herd big enough to fill the valley, wild enough to shape the land as it once was. Ted Turner saw a problem most ranchers ignored. If bison were ever going to thrive again, Americans had to want them on their plates. So in 2002, he teamed up with George McCarrow, a veteran restaurateur, and opened the first Ted's Montana Grill in Columbus, Ohio. The menu was a gamble: bison burgers, bison chili, bison pot roast, served in a polished, old-school steakhouse setting. Diners in Atlanta, Denver, and Kansas City soon found bison on the menu, not as a novelty, but as the main event. The concept was simple but radical: make bison mainstream, educate the public, and create a steady market that would support conservation back on the ranch. The numbers tell the story. In just over a decade, Ted's Montana Grill sold more than 16 million bison burgers. That's not counting the millions of steaks, ribs, and even bison nachos that followed. Each burger meant another reason to keep herds growing, prairies healthy, and ranch hands working. McCarrow called it a conservation movement disguised as a restaurant chain. City diners, most of whom had never set foot on the Flying D, became unwitting partners in the restoration of the American West. They learned bison was leaner than beef, better for the land, and rooted in the country's oldest food traditions. With every order, they fueled a market that made conservation pay. The success of Ted's Montana Grill gave Turner the financial cushion to take even bigger risks back in Montana. It proved that saving a species could also mean building a business empire, one burger at a time. Wolves crossed onto the Flying D in the late 1990s, drifting south from Yellowstone and leaving paw prints where only cattle tracks had been for generations. The first sightings came from ranch hands checking fence lines at dawn, gray shadows slipping through the timber, a single howl echoing down Spanish Creek. Word reached Ted Turner within hours. Where most ranchers would have called in state trappers, Turner called his biologists. He wanted confirmation. Tracks, scat, every detail. The ranch's wildlife team fanned out, tracking the newcomers through snow and sage, mapping their routes and cataloging kills. Elk carcasses began turning up along the Madison, ribs picked clean, wolf prints circling in the mud. Neighbors braced for trouble. In town, the talk was sharp. Cattlemen muttered about lost calves and government overreach, some blaming Turner for rolling out the welcome mat. But Turner was unfazed. He told the Bozeman Daily Chronicle he was thrilled at their arrival. He'd spent years restoring the land for wild bison. Now, he argued, wolves were part of the deal. If you want the prairie back, you take the whole package, he told his staff, predators included. Biologists on the Flying D began tracking the packs in earnest, collaring a female and logging her movements as she ranged from the Gallatin foothills to the edge of the ranch's big pasture. Their notes filled with observations on pack size, hunting patterns, and den sites. Wolf behavior studies from Yellowstone suggested bison could hold their own. Herds formed defensive circles, calves pressed to the center, adults lowering their heads and standing ground. Cattle, by contrast, scattered and ran. The difference was not lost on the neighbors. As the wolves settled in, the Flying D became a flashpoint. Turner's refusal to trap or shoot the newcomers put him at odds with every rancher from Gallatin Gateway to Ennis. The tension across the fence line was as thick as the timber. The wolves were here to stay, and so was the fight over what kind of wild belonged in Montana. In 1989, Ted Turner signed away the future of the Flying D with a single stroke of a pen. The conservation easement, hammered out with the Nature Conservancy, locked 113,613 acres of Montana forever out of the reach of developers, speculators, and even his own heirs. No subdivisions, no luxury homes, no ski resorts creeping up the Spanish peaks. The agreement was clear. This land would remain whole, wild, and working, never to be carved up, paved over, or sold in pieces. The Nature Conservancy's negotiators had seen plenty of deals, but nothing on this scale, not in Montana. The Flying D became the second largest conservation easement in the state, a permanent barrier against the westward march of condos and cul-de-sacs. The terms were ironclad. Turner kept the right to run his bison, to hunt, to manage the land as a ranch, but the door to subdivision was slammed shut. He gave up millions in potential profits. Prime Gallatin Valley real estate, riverfront, timber, all of it off limits for good. The easement didn't just protect open space, it locked in the entire sweep of grassland, timber, and river for wildlife, for bison, for the idea that a ranch could be both a business and a sanctuary. The Nature Conservancy took on the job of watchdog, with the legal teeth to stop any future owner from breaking the pact. For Turner, the easement was the final word. He'd built his empire by betting on the future, but here, he was betting against it, against the temptation to cash out, against the slow creep of roads and rooftops. The Flying D would stay as it was, a single unbroken piece of the West, landlocked by law, not just by fences. In a state where fortunes were made by subdividing the frontier, Turner sealed his off forever. In 1989, Ted Turner paid $21 million to purchase the Flying D Ranch, instantly transforming 107,000 Montana acres and igniting outrage among local cattlemen. Within months, crews removed 400 miles of barbed wire and retired thousands of irrigated acres, making way for bison herds not seen here in over a century. Today, Flying D supports over 6,000 bison and anchors the world's largest private herd, while Ted's Montana Grill restaurants have sold more than 16 million bison burgers since 2002. When wolves crossed from Yellowstone, Turner welcomed them, further dividing his operation from neighboring ranches. In 2015, a conservation easement with the Nature Conservancy permanently protected 113,613 acres. Yet, questions remain. Some details of the easement remain confidential, and long-term ecological impacts are still being studied. What is clear, the Flying D stands as a dramatic experiment in fusing business with conservation, proving that one man's vision, backed by $21 million and relentless resolve, can reshape the American West.